Although the concept of rating films on a scale is not new, the rise in popularity of the film app Letterboxd has put a focal point on ratings and reviews for movie lovers. There are countless different scales used to rate movies, with the most popular being a simple 1 to 10 numerical scale or the popular 5-star scale that Letterboxd uses. Some people do a minimalist thumbs up, thumbs down method, while others do a maximalist out of 100 method. None of these are necessarily right or wrong, and often when you start to think about rating films too deeply, the concept starts to fall apart. Assigning a number value can feel reductionist towards a film by boiling down a complex piece of art into a simple number. While I can agree that you shouldn't boil art down into a math problem, I also find it as a form of expression for the reviewer. Star ratings are not the end-all be-all of film criticism. Everybody can give a star rating to a film, but those ratings mean different things to different people, which honestly just makes them mostly arbitrary. Especially in regards to Letterboxd, reviews often tend to not be that serious. I don't mean that in a reductive way, but the app is a form of social media where many reviews are witty one-liners that rack up likes and not necessarily full-fledged reviews, although those absolutely do exist on the app. My point being that their real thoughts can be either in the review itself or can be found by having a conversation about it with that person. Two people can give very different star ratings, but when they actually talk about the movie, they find that they actually feel similarly towards the film, but just quantify it differently. Some people break it down mathematically, where others decide their rating solely on vibes. And I get that to a degree, but I also think it's important to have self-reflection and think about why films make us feel the way they do when engaging with the art form. Now, I do think there is a distinction between film reviews and film analysis that some people conflate. A review tends to be read by people who have not seen the movie and is designed to tell the reader whether the film is worth watching or not. A film analysis tends to be a deep dive into the film, explaining or expressing its themes, conventions, impact, and personal relationships with the film. Obviously, there is a lot of overlap between analysis and reviews, but at the end of the day, reviews are designed to tell the reader to watch or not watch a movie. Knowing that this distinction exists complicates things because, especially in regards to Letterboxd, there is no clear distinction, and honestly, there probably shouldn't be on the app. Like I said, Letterboxd is a social media app and should be used for self-expression over raw critical analysis, and I think a star rating is best used for self-expression rather than the definitive, all-encompassing feeling of a film. For me personally, I like to think of the ratings in a bell curve normal distribution, where the average movie that comes out will be a 2.5 star, and a standard deviation of 1, with 0.5 and 5 stars being rare exceptions. However, this is what my current Letterboxd graph looks like, obviously skewed to the right. But in my defense, I mostly watch movies I assume I will like. If I watched every new movie that came out, I'd watch a lot more straight-to-streaming slop and mediocre films, and my curve would be bell-shaped. I think of films as a whole in a normal distribution, not my personal graph. This way, it doesn't influence me to give a film a lower rating so that my personal graph looks more bell-shaped, but it does influence the way that I rate in general. I think because I have this approach, I do tend to view lower ratings as better than most. To me, a 3.5 is still a very good rating, so when people see I gave Misery or Carrie those ratings, they accuse me of not liking those movies. But I most definitely did. That's a 7 out of 10. I feel like people often don't use the lower numbers on the rating scale, and honestly I catch myself having trouble really discerning the difference between a 2 and a 2.5 star film. It often feels like once it passes below 2.5, it's just a bad movie, and there is less difference between the star ratings once it's considered bad. For 5 stars specifically, I like to use them as a personal form of expression for my favorite movies. I tend to give few movies 5 stars, with only about 2.5% of the movies I've seen being 5 stars. When you see me rate a film 4.5 stars, just know that it is probably as good as a 5-star film, but to me a 5-star film has to have some sort of je ne sais quoi to it, some X factor that puts it above the rest in a special way, not just that it's really technically good. It needs to move me on such a spiritual level that I have no choice but to give it 5 stars. These films include the works of Tarkovsky like Mirror and Stalker, or Agnes Varda's Le Bonheur, or even films that just have a big personal impact on me like Godzilla, which sparked me to be a huge fan of the entire franchise. I reserve these 5-star films for ones I would specifically say are my favorites, and I like being picky with them because I like for it to be a big moment when I give a film 5 stars. You could argue that my half-star ratings are essentially the inverse of this. In order to get that low of a rating, then you have to be so astronomically bad that I am at a loss for words. I have to be so genuinely angry after watching the film for me to give it that rating. Films like Dragon Ball Evolution, The Last Airbender, and Argyle. I remember being genuinely pissed off watching these movies because they were so bad. However, I also use these half-star ratings for films I deem morally repugnant. Films like Birth of a Nation or 16 Candles. Birth of a Nation is the most disturbingly racist film I've ever seen, depicting the KKK as heroic figures protecting America from the evil and dangerous black people. It's a film with awful real-world impacts on Americans by invigorating the second wave of the KKK. 16 Candles is a film that features rape and blatant misogyny to a truly awful degree that I couldn't give it anything except a half star. Before people start moaning in the comments that these films were just products of their time, or that we can't judge solely based on morals like that, firstly, I would like to say that I don't care if they're a product of their time. I'm watching it at this time. Also, thematic importance of a film is the majority of the takeaway of a film. If a film is solely about the pride of the Confederacy, then it is a bad movie. Many people have asked me if I rate based on personal enjoyment or objective criteria, and I think the differences between the two are not as far apart as people think. Same thing with picking your favorite films versus the best films. I do understand the difference, but it's not as different as it seems. Personal enjoyment is a major factor in a film's quality. Each person is going to have their own individual reaction to a film, each person bringing their own life experiences and worldviews to the screen. People who have certain problems will have a more powerful reaction to films about said problems. A movie can have the most technically masterful camera work and acting imaginable, but if you don't click with the subject matter or have any visceral reactions, then you don't like that movie. I have seen some people rate on a scale that takes each individual aspect of the film and rates it, such as cinematography 8 out of 10, acting 9 out of 10, etc., and then averaging those numbers. Obviously, anyone can rate however they want, it is completely subjective, but I find this way of viewing a film as reductive and a poor way to engage with cinema. Cinema is a collection of individual aspects that come together, but I think it's better to think of a film as more than the sum of its parts. It's better to not think of each aspect acting independently, but working in tandem. The actor's performance combined with the cinematography, combined with the sound design, combined with everything else is what elicits the emotion. Yes, if one aspect among these isn't up to par, it will decrease the quality, but it's not additive. It's not how good the cinematography is, plus how good the acting is, plus how good the music is. It's a combination that can't be quantified in individual aspects. It also works for some films less than others. If you're watching an epic fantasy or sci-fi film, you'll expect the cinematography and production design to be more elaborate than an intimate romance. So judging these on the same scale like this makes no sense, because a minimalist design for smaller films actually adds to the film, as elaborate sets and shots would take away from the emotions and the characters. There are also certain directors with distinct styles that don't fit into this one-size-fits-all category. How are you going to rate the cinematography of a Yasujiro Ozu film? His films are so tied directly to his distinct visual style that it feels odd to say anything about it within a rating. Same thing with acting when it comes to directors like David Lynch or Robert Bresson. Robert Bresson is known for having extremely stripped down, almost emotionless performances. So are you going to rate the acting 0 out of 10 for a Bresson film when the acting isn't what the film is even about? That's just a misunderstanding of what makes Bresson great. I used to have a more dialectical approach to rating films, but as I engaged in more cinema, specifically in more unique styles of cinema, my strict concepts of ratings began to crumble. I began to realize that it's impossible to quantify the infinite possibilities of a movie. Falling in love with every type of cinema makes it harder to compare. How can I give both Tokyo Story and Goodfellas the same rating? These films are so wildly different, but can the same principles apply to both? I've even debated about stopping giving out ratings as a whole because it feels trivial, but I continue to do it honestly because it's fun to do and is a form of expressions about myself rather than the end-all be-all of film criticism. If I was a true film critic that wrote for a paper, I would probably have a different approach, but since I mostly do film analysis and have a social media presence, my ratings are pretty arbitrary. While I have a general system that I use to rate movies now, this has changed over time and will continue to be a fluid concept for me as my experience with film broadens over time. However, what stays constant is the importance of reflecting on how we analyze and how we engage with movies.